New year, old tactics. It looks like Prince Harry has learned a thing or two from his wife, Meghan Markle, being one, not taking no for an answer, even when no is the appropriate answer, and two, manifestation. A few days ago, over the weekend, on the 4th of January, articles started to pop out of nowhere, claiming that Prince Harry has indeed finally won the battle. When I saw these headlines, I foolishly forgot what clickbait was and fell for it. That is, until I bothered reading the bodies of these articles. And believe me when I tell you, mainstream media has seriously hit rock bottom. I mean, they're the same as Meghan and Harry in a way. It's funny that they're in cahoots. They belong together. There is no rock bottom. Just when you think things couldn't possibly get worse in the mainstream media in terms of accuracy and fact checking, they always prove us wrong. For instance, Exhibit A, Metro. Prince Harry has won his fight for private security when he is in the UK. It has been claimed. The Duke of Sussex's lengthy battle with the Home Office looks set to come to an end after the Royal and VIP Executive Committee ROVEC said the prince meets the threshold for official protection. It claims he may be granted automatic armed police protection in a matter of weeks, provided the ruling is in his favor. So as you can see, every single sentence is succeeded with an opposing claim. So first they say, it has happened. It's claimed. He has won it, or at least it appears to be. ROVEC has ruled, but he may be granted. The truth is, as of today at least, which is the day of filming, the 7th of January, we still have no idea what ROVEC's decision actually is. That's why I pointed out the date of this article earlier and all the other articles, the 4th of January. It was a Sunday. Somebody please tell me what government body is convening on a Sunday to discuss the security concerns of an ex-royal for all intents and purposes. So there was your first red flag, that this is all PR fluff being put out by Harry as manifestation. Now, I could be wrong. We could find out as early as tomorrow or even later today that he has indeed been granted taxpayer-funded armed security whenever he visits the UK. But until we get that confirmation, it's safe to call all of this manifestation at this point.
I eat no for breakfast.
I mentioned earlier that he's learned two things from Meghan. We've just covered the manifestation, putting it out there in the world, waiting for it to come true. But then there was also the refusal to take no for an answer. This is a detail that I believe I may have missed last year because as soon as the case was closed, literally in court, I mentally switched off out of this case. It's over, it's finished, you're not gonna get it. But back in September, after the court loss, Harry privately reached out to the Home Secretary, Shabana Mahmood, calling for a reappraisal of his security status in the UK, which then allegedly prompted this fresh assessment that was recently carried out by ROVEC. And if we are to believe Harry's side, then it's basically a done deal. They told the Mail on Sunday that Harry's private security has been reinstated. It's just now a formality. Sources at the Home Office have indicated that security is now nailed on for Harry. We've covered the details of this long court battle for the reinstatement of security for years now. I've combed through every single judgment and we've discussed it, analyzed it, explained it, summarized it. So we're not going to be doing any more of that in today's video, I assure you. But what instantly popped into my head was Wallace and Edward, because a year and a half ago, when I had done, I believe, a 5-part series called the Sussex-Windsor Files, I recall that Edward and Wallace did indeed have royal protection. Even though they were not part of the royal family, they were practically exiled out of the UK itself. Funded, presumably, Wallace and Edward were penny pinchers themselves, by the UK government and foreign governments as well, which is what the word about the streets is regarding Meghan and Harry's intentions. Meaning they're vying so hard for armed security because they want to be internationally protected persons. I think that's what IPP stands for. So that wherever they go in the world, we, the taxpayer, have to foot the bill, the ginormous bill for their security. Starting with their honeymoon. which was in 1937. On their honeymoon, a pair of Scotland Yard detectives guarded them. Now, to be fair, according to Traitor King by Andrew Loney, the Scotland Yard officers weren't just there to protect them, but allegedly also to spy on them. Then there was the 1937 German tour, the infamous tour which really painted Edward and Wallace in a terrible light in terms of their sympathies and association with the Nazi Party. There, Philip Atfield was assigned as their protection officer. Again, one would assume not just to guard them, but to spy, which is completely understandable considering they're going to enemy territory. Then, the very next year, in 1938, and I'm going to quote straight out of Traitor King here, protection remained a big issue, with several British and French police officers always with them, even when the Duke played golf. When the couple lunched or dined in restaurants or with friends, or when they paid visits to couturiers, milliners, jewelers, or antique shops, an officer always waited outside and a gendarme always stood guard at the front door of their home. Now, this was a year before World War II, which started on the 1st of September, I believe, 1939, if I'm remembering things all the way back from military training. However, around September 1939. In 1940, the war was well underway, and if you've tuned into my Sussex-Windsor series, or if you've read the books or, watched documentaries about Wallace and Edward, then you'd know that there were two opposing camps, I suppose, about their story during the war. One was they were unwitting, I suppose, puppets being toyed around by the Nazis because Hitler was hoping to use Edward as a puppet king to further his takeover, his world domination agenda. And then there was the other camp, which firmly believed that Edward and Wallace were fully in on it and were completely in cahoots with Hitler, did want to take over, displace Edward's brother, King George VI, and resume his place as the king who was sympathetic to the Nazis with his wife as queen by his side. It appears that the British government was playing it safe by assuming both could be true. We know Winston Churchill was very pro-Edward. In fact, he's the reason that a lot of the documents called the Windsor Files that painted Edward in a negative light and as a Nazi sympathizer were kept hidden for so long. But I digress. In 1940, at the height of the war, there were concerns that the couple might be kidnapped or might speak indiscreetly to the press. And as a result, they were treated as prisoners in their own home at the time. So there were patrols in the garden by guards. They could only leave the compound with permission and an armed guard, and could only walk along the shore road where they could be observed. In the same year, in 1940, according to the Portuguese Secret Service surveillance records, the Duke, who asked for his police protection to be removed at one point, was, quote, an active player in the plot. So again, we have here a reference to there being armed security or police protection. So much so that Edward wanted to get rid of them, assuming he didn't want to be watched while he was aiding and abetting the Nazis. Fast forward to 1942, where we get more confirmation that they are still under royal protection, and Churchill, in fact, asked for even more protection. He wrote a personal minute for the Chiefs of Staff Committee saying that there is a danger of them being kidnapped again after the failed attempt of Operation Willie. If you don't know what I'm talking about, again, I do urge you to watch my Sussex-Windsor Files series. Churchill believed that the Germans still wanted to get their hands on Edward to use him. And so because of that, he wanted continued protection against an attack by 50 men during darkness. And then again in that year, we get confirmation that the existing protection of an armed police guard has been indeed reinforced. Now, in 1942, Edward was governor of the Bahamas. So obviously, he's a public servant. He's working for the British government effectively. He has an official post. And armed guards, police protection, whatever you want to call it, on the taxpayer dime is completely justified. I do think if Prince Harry in some alternate universe, if he held some official post, for example, say in Canada, then I don't think people would begrudge police protection if that were the case, because he's actually doing his job. He's providing a service. He is a public servant. But as it stands, of course, we know Prince Harry doesn't hold any position, let alone an official position for the UK government or the royal family. Then in 1944, we learned that Wallis, at the end of her first New York visit as the Duchess of Windsor, called in detectives who had been assigned to guard the royal suite, which she and the Duke occupied at the Waldorf. I do believe Edward was still governor of the Bahamas at this time because it was a 5-year stint, and so arguable that they were entitled to this protection. And we're going to get to bigger reasons as to why they were entitled, in my opinion, to all this protection. Just bear with me. But at this time, still a public servant. It is interesting to note, though, that even when they travel around, go to New York, etc., they are getting that global protection that Meghan and Harry so clearly are vying for. And then finally, towards the end of their lives, the Windsors settled down in their forever home at Villa Windsor in Paris. By the way, I tried visiting Villa Windsor, and the last time I did, it was inaccessible to the public because it's under renovations. So hopefully one day we'll get to actually go in and get some actual firsthand footage. That'll be really cool. Now, they didn't actually purchase the home, but a really sweet deal was brokered on their behalf by a British government official, Walter Monckton. And he was able to negotiate a nominal rent that they had to pay, and more importantly, for the purposes of this video, free security. So that was added to the diplomatic status that was negotiated by Walter Monckton. Now, I'm going to assume free security was provided by the French government, again confirming that whole IPP status that Wallis and Edward enjoyed, or at least some variation of it, despite not being working royals at all. I'd also like to note, this is just an interesting tidbit confirming how, I suppose, cheap or stingy Wallis and Edward were. The Duke's personal fortune at the time was at least $3 million. Now, that doesn't seem like a lot in today's terms, especially for a former king. But let's not forget that this was way back when, and inflation does come into play. So they had a lot of money. They could afford many things, which they always ended up somehow either getting for a nominal amount or entirely for free. All right, so clearly Edward and Wallis enjoyed, or perhaps didn't enjoy, armed police protection for practically their entire lives. And so some might use this as an argument to say, well, if a disgraced king who was practically exiled by his own country gets to enjoy armed police protection for his entire life all over the globe, why not Prince Harry? And I think to a lot of us, the answer is pretty obvious. Edward was the former king. Prince Harry was born a spare and is always going to be the spare. I mean, he knows it. It's in the title of his book. For all the perceived similarities between Edward and Harry, that will always be the biggest difference. Their status, their place in the royal pecking order. And so it is very arguable that a former king would always be a high target. A former king would potentially be at risk of getting kidnapped or used in a ploy, as history says did indeed take place. And as I mentioned, he also actively worked for the British government in the Bahamas. Prince Harry has done none of these things. He was obviously never king, was never slated to be king, especially once Prince William started having children. And so there is no viable argument, in my opinion, as to why Prince Harry, and especially his wife and children, should be afforded police protection, even if it's just in the UK, specifically because it's being paid for by the public. And as per my understanding, I'm not a British citizen, I am a Commonwealth citizen, but as per my understanding, if you're paying for something, it's because that person or entity are doing something in return. If Prince Harry continued being a working royal, a full-time working royal, I highly doubt anyone would have had issues with funding his protection, even if he were problematic, even if he and Meghan were stirring up controversy and drama, but they remained within the royal fold. I really don't think many people, other than Republicans, I suppose, would have any issues with continuing to fund their security. He claims that he is at high risk because of a Sussex squatty, a woman who is a big fan of Meghan and Harry's. And that's why she's following him around everywhere. As terrible as it sounds to say this, being stalked is a risk that all of us face simply by existing on this planet. Whether you're Prince Harry, whether you're Angelina Jolie, whether you're a nobody. I've been stalked, Zach's been stalked. And before we were on YouTube, restraining orders, police, everything, the whole shebang, everything was involved. It was a really serious thing. Why? Because we existed in the world. We exist in the world. And so I'm not saying that Prince Harry shouldn't be concerned or worried about this very determined fan, I would say, because I don't think she posed him any risk. Unless I'm mistaken, I don't get the impression that this woman intended any harm on Prince Harry. But yes, you do get mega rabid fans who end up being stalkers, which is not acceptable. But does it justify an entire nation funding your security when you have not only turned your back on that nation, but spit, metaphorically, in its face every chance you get? That hissy fit interview Prince Harry gave after he lost the court case last year was yet again him spitting at the monarchy, at the institution, and at its people. And yet, learning from his wife, or maybe he was always like this, he somehow found the gall. He had the audacity to write to the Home Office Secretary, urging her to reconsider. I don't think this is going to go down too well. If anything, people are just going to view the monarchy more unfavorably if this armed security is granted, because it gives out this message of no matter what Harry and Meghan do, no matter what the elites do, they always get what they want. And it's bad enough that they've never technically seen any consequences other than, their destroyed reputation, but that's self-inflicted. They've never been made to feel any consequences for their actions. And so to then give them what they've so obviously coveted for so long is just the rotten icing on an incredibly disgusting rotten cake. Some people really think he deserves it, by the way. I've seen a lot of discourse online in the midst of researching this topic. A lot of people genuinely think that he's at risk and we are all nasty people who wish him harm. But I genuinely don't wish him any harm. I think he's been a fool with regards to his security with that whole Taliban comment 3 years ago now in his book. I think he did that to himself. But again, he's basing most of his security claims now on that rabid Sussex squatty who's just obsessed with him rather than an actual active threat being issued by a terrorist group. So whether that justifies full-time armed security, I guess you can all let me know in the comments section. Everyone is welcome to weigh in. I will be specifically interested, I will say, in the thoughts of British tax-paying citizens, because it will be you who will be funding this man, and not only his protection, but presumably the protection of his wife, if she ever deigns to set foot in the UK again, and their 2 children. Looking forward to reading what you have to say in the comment section, and I'll see you next time.